What's up, guys? Welcome back to Pipe to Grep Labs. Tonight I'm going to show you how to write and run your first salt state. Before we do that though, I'll take care of a couple housekeeping things. I'm running as root on my Salt Master, and this is an Ubuntu 16.04 box, and I've got two minions connected, and here is the versions report for the master and the two minions. And this is a pretty helpful command, by the way. I definitely recommend it for larger environments too, because you can see exactly which minions are older than your master. It has a nice little grouping output when you get into more minions. Alright, but before we write this salt state, there's a little bit of configuration that we're going to have to do. So I want to go ahead and do that first. So I'm going to go into the ets salt directory first here. Alright, and I just want to point out there is the main master configuration file, and so you can certainly go ahead and edit that. Personally, I prefer to work in the master.d directory and just create my own custom file, and then just keep in mind when you edit your custom file, it'll override anything that's in that default master config. So I just like to work that way, but you can do either way. It'll work just fine. Alright, so I'm going to go in here, and I've already got my ports established, so we're not going to worry about those for now. The first setting that I want to talk about, and it actually doesn't need to be explicitly defined, but I think it's important to mention, so we're going to go ahead and define it to its default value, just so it makes sense, and so that we understand what's going on with our salt state files. Alright, in this first setting, you can read more about it and all the other master settings on this page from SaltStack. This is docs.saltstack.com, and configuring the Salt Master. If you just Google this, it'll come right up, you'll find it. So this first option we're interested in is going to be the file roots option. And for now, I basically want you just to think about this. Basically, this setting is going to define where you need to put your salt state files. Alright, so basically which directory. So by default, it's going to be the base environment, and then we're going to put it in a directory called serve salt. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Alright, so I'll go ahead and type it out, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Alright, so first of all, Salt likes to use the YAML syntax. Alright, so the state files are going to be written in the same language. And the biggest thing to keep in mind is spacing and colons are very important. So as you see here, we went ahead and put 2 spaces in for the second line, and then for the third line, we put 4 spaces in. And if we had another line below this, it'd be 6 spaces, and so on. Alright, and basically what we're saying here is the base environment for our salt environment is going to be the serve salt directory. So again, that's where we're going to want to put our state files. And you can get pretty crazy with this. You can define all kinds of environments. You'll see on the SaltStack page, they'll have examples of a production environment, a dev, so on and so forth, and they can point to different directories. But for this tutorial, we're not going to get into all that. I just want to get you ready to go to run a basic state file. Alright, moving on, the last setting I'm going to talk about is the file server backend. Alright, we're going to go ahead and set the file server backend to roots. Effectively, what we're saying here is we're going to store all of our salt files on the local file system, alright, on our Ubuntu server. And specifically, we're going to store them in this roots environment that we defined earlier up here. So basically, once again, we're just going to store our files in this serve salt directory. That's effectively what we're saying here. And with the file server backend in Salt, you can set this to other things such as GitHub, but for now we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to roll with this basic configuration. Alright, and so we're going to go ahead and write the salt state file now, but I do just want to point out this configuration, both the file roots and the file server backend, we actually didn't need to explicitly define them because by default they're set to exactly what I've set them here. But I do think they're important concepts to understand, and I think you're going to understand salt state files a whole lot better having looked at this. let's go ahead and restart the master to apply the config that we just made. Alright, so it's restarted, and I am in the /serve directory now, and by default there is no salt directory, so we'll go ahead and just create that manually. Alright, and now we have our directory where our file roots should be. So let's go ahead and create our state file now. I'm going to go ahead and just VI right into it, and I'm just going to call it demo.sls, and you can call state files whatever you want to call them, but they do have to have the .sls extension. Alright, so I'm going to go right in. The first line is called the ID declaration, and this is actually arbitrary. You can name it whatever you want, so I'm just going to name it demo state. Alright, and then you need the colon, and then you got to go down and go 2 spaces. Alright, and now this next thing is going to be the state as well as the module that we're going to run. Alright, and so the state name is file, and then you're going to put a dot, and then it's going to be the module name that you want to run. So I'm going to do file.managed and then a colon. And I just want to point out that with a lot of the states in Salt, you'll see this, like with file, for example, it has many modules. There's file.recurse and some other ones you can do. I'm going to do file.managed here, but it's sort of like encoding. If you think of file as almost like your object, and then managed as like your function, it's a little bit like that. Alright, and so let's go down to the next line, and now let's go 4 spaces, and then we're just going to put a dash, and then we're going to start listing the different attributes and sort of the different things we want to do within file.managed. So I do want to back up for a second. File.managed is a state that basically is used to copy files and manage files down to your minion. So basically, for example, if you have a config file that you've set up with all your custom settings on your master, and you want to be able to push that to however many minions, you can use something like file.managed, and you can place it in a directory of your choosing on the minion, and you can even replace files that are already on the minion with your custom one. So let's go ahead and start with the source parameter, and this is where you tell your state where you want to get your file from on the master. And so I haven't created this file yet, testfile.txt, but I'll back up and do that. So let me just explain this for a second. Basically what we're saying here is we're saying with this prefix, this salt : // that refers to our file roots directory. So in this example, that refers to /serve/salt. So we're telling the state to look in the /serve/salt directory and look for a file named testfile.txt. Alright, and that's going to be basically our source file that we're then going to copy down to the minion into a directory of our choosing. And I just want to point out, if you're grabbing a file from the master, like we are, then you do need to use this syntax of salt : //. If you try to just put /serve/salt /testfile.txt, that would actually refer to the minions file system. So you need to use that salt little keyword at the beginning. Alright, and then the next one, we're going to do name. Alright, and then this is where we choose the name of the file and the directory location on the minion of where we want to put the file. So I'm going to go ahead and just put it in /home, and I'll also just call it testfile.txt. Alright, and let's add a couple other attributes just so we can see some of the functionality of file.managed. So I'm going to go ahead and set the user for the file. I'm going to set the group, and then I'll also go ahead and set the mode, aka the file permissions. Alright, and so let's go ahead and save this. Okay, so we've got our state file now. The last thing we need is that test file that our state is referencing, so let's go ahead and create that. I'm just going to create something kind of funny, why not? Let's do Ricky Bobby, and we're just going to echo that into testfile.txt. Alright, so now we've got that file there, and before we run this state, I want to go ahead and just show you what's going on the minion. So here I'm SSH'd into the minion, and in the home directory, there is no test file. All right, so I just want to show you that beforehand. So let's go ahead and run the state now. All right, and I'm just going to target one minion here. Super exciting minion name, I know. Salt Minion 1. All right, and then we're going to do state.apply. There are other state functions that you can call, but for now, don't worry about that. This will work just fine. You're just going to do state.apply, and then you're just going to need to call the name of your SLS file. But the last weird part, you're going to have to take off the dot and the SLS extension. It's a little weird, I know, but you'll get used to it. Let's go ahead and run it, see what happens. All right, and Salt is pretty good about being verbose, as you can see. So it gives us some info. The result was true, it worked. Gives us a comment, home test file was updated. All right, and some other info, as you can see. And let's go ahead and check out the minion and see if any of that is true. And sure enough, it is. There it is, test file. All right, with the 777 permissions, and we'll go ahead and cat it. And sure enough, there's Ricky Bobby. All right, so it worked. Other important thing to keep in mind about Salt, and the reason they call them states is because it's different from, say, a shell script that when you call it, it'll just run no matter what. A state is called that because it's checking to see if a certain condition is in a certain state. So in our example, it's checking to see if the home directory on the minion has a file named testfile.txt with dbulldozer as the user, root as the group, and the mode of 777 with the the content of what's in the file on our master, which is Ricky Bobby in this case. So if we call the state again, it's not going to do any harm, and it's not going to try to do anything it doesn't need to do. So let's see what happens. Notice the output, it just says that it's already in the correct state, so there's nothing really to do. So it's good to go. And that's one of the biggest differences between, say, Salt and trying to run like a shell script over and over again. The shell script, depending on what it is, could do damage if it continues to do things that don't need to be done. I do want to mention there's an important concept in Salt that I've left out of this video, and that's known as the top file, and that can be used to assign different Salt states and particular states to particular minions. But there's two reasons I've left it out. One, as you just saw, it's not actually necessary to configure to run states, and I wanted to do something quick and easy to just get you used to running states and get you going. And two, my next video is going to talk all about the top file, so I'll just save it for that. Alright, so the last thing I want to show before we go is that there's a few different ways you can arrange your Salt states and call them. So what I've done is I actually created a directory now called demo, and if we look in demo, there's a file now called init.sls. Alright, and if I cat that, it's the same exact Salt state that we wrote earlier in the tutorial. Alright, but now we've just kind of arranged how it's going to be called. So basically, you can create a directory and then create a file within that directory called init.sls, and then you can just call the name of the directory. Alright, and when you call the name of the directory, it's going to look for a file called init, and then it's going to run whatever states are in that. So let's go ahead and prove that real quick. Alright, so we're calling just the name of the directory. Alright, and it goes ahead and runs it. Alright, and so the last thing I want to show is kind of a neat and organized way to run multiple states. So I've got the demo directory again, but let's go in there. I now have two different SLS state files. Alright, I've got demo, which is our original state that we've been working with the whole time, and I've added an SSH state. This one is just going to install the package SSH. Note that that's one of the simplest states you'll see, too, by the way, as of course you can notice. But note that the ID declaration isn't arbitrary the way I've written it there. That SSH, that does have to be a real package name. Alright, and then our init file that you also noticed, this now is just going to have an include statement, and it's going to include those two state files. Alright, and the dot is just to specify the current directory. So we've got demo, we've got SSH. Alright, and I do want to point out you don't have to do it this way. You could put multiple states, for instance the file.managed state and the SSH state in the same SLS file. That's just fine, but this is kind of a nice, neat, organized way to do it. Alright, and so let's go ahead and call this Alright, and we don't have to call it from the serve salt directory as you see here, because Salt knows about our file root's location. Alright, so I'm actually referring, when I say demo here, this is actually referring to the demo directory, not the SLS file. And it'll end up calling the init file, which of course will then call the other SLSs. So when we run that, we're going to see that two different states were run, and we see the output from both of them. I will admit, when I'm working with Salt, I usually put all my states in the same SLS file, but it does depend how complicated the project is, and definitely if it's more complicated, breaking it out into those separate files in a directory can be really nice organizationally. But anyway, that's it for this video. Please subscribe for more if you're interested. I hope this has been helpful, and let me know if there's anything else you want to see in Salt.